Folks, we're not dealing with 100,000 people in Hamas. We're dealing with perhaps upwards of 100 to 150 million radicalized Muslims. Hi, this is Bishop Robert Stearns. I am here in the city of Jerusalem for this week's Israel Frontline update. If you are new to the channel, thank you for dropping by. We seek to unpack every week the details, the intricacies, the complexities of what happens here in this city, in this nation, in the surrounding area, and how the ripple effects of what happens here literally touches the nations of the world. So we're glad that you've dropped by because there's so much to unpack this week. It is extraordinary, the amount of things that are happening right now here on the ground in Jerusalem. Let's start with something happening half a world away, but directly impacting Israel and the nations, and that is the upcoming United Nations General Assembly. September the 22nd, mark the date. This is a moment of global and historic importance. September the 22nd, the upcoming United Nations Summit. We anticipate Britain, France, Canada, Australia, Belgium, and others uniting together to unilaterally, formally recognize a Palestinian state. This is a watershed moment in modern history, and one that we need to really be praying about and looking into. Now, we can look at this through a spiritual lens, and we can look at it through a geopolitical lens. And we do have to understand that there are times in history where these two viewpoints intersect. So let's begin with a geopolitical lens. America, Israel, and several other nations are in opposition to this unilateral declaration of Palestinian statehood. And here is some of the simple reasons why. How do you declare a Palestinian state with what leadership? Israel, for the past 30 years, has been seeking to find a functional Palestinian leadership with which to partner. First, we had Yasser Arafat, who would speak one thing to the Arab Muslim world in Arabic and another thing to the West in English, and robbed his people blind, was an absolute disgrace of a leader. And now we have Mahmoud Abbas, who is serving something like the 23rd year of a 4-year elected sentence. He's in his 80s. He is not regarded in any way as respectable or someone who's a strong leader in the Palestinian community. You have Hamas in Gaza. There are no credible Palestinian leaders who have arisen, who are able to give sensible, forceful, peaceful leadership to the Palestinian people. You have infighting between Fatah, who is ruled by Mahmoud Abbas in Ramallah, and Hamas in Gaza. These two factions are at war. Who are you going to say that you're going to cooperate with to bring forth this Palestinian state? This is what people don't understand. Israel left Gaza in 2005, and there was an incredible, historic opportunity for the Palestinians to develop that area and conduct themselves in such a way that would lead to the creation of a genuine partner for peace. So I don't know what fantasy land Western leaders are living in. I don't understand how they think they can wave a magic wand and create a nation state out of a place that is wrapped up in chaos, in tribalism, in corruption, in infighting, and nothing like the rule of law. There is nothing like the rule of law that is prevalent in Hamas's thinking, and Fatah is barely any better. So that's a geopolitical question. We switch to viewing this through a spiritual lens, and I would say we are in a Psalm 2 moment. The kings of the earth gather themselves together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us cast their bonds asunder. In other words, we're going to do what we think is right. We're going to live by our value system, by our playbook. But the scripture says, he who sits in the heavens laughs. God has the final word. And so we've got to be in prayer, and we've got to have attention on what is coming in New York on September the 22nd. September the 16th, Israel is beginning its long-awaited Gaza City offensive. And Israel has officially begun its ground offensive to take over Gaza City, the most populated city in the Gaza Strip. And folks, this is where things get incredibly confusing, incredibly painful, incredibly murky and difficult. I'm going to do my very best to explain to you here the complexity of this on the ground. There are so many moving parts happening at all the same time. You have the reality of the hostages who are still alive, almost 2 years living in tunnels. And so you have all of these families of these living hostages. We know that many are still alive. And so there is this incredibly intense emotion about freeing the hostages. But Israeli society is now very, very divided, because there's a huge portion of Israeli society that is saying to the Netanyahu government, you've had 2 years to release the hostages militarily. It has not worked. And if you try to do it again militarily, they're probably going to be killed. So let's lose this one and hopefully get our hostages back. Give Hamas what they want. There's a very large portion of Israeli society and frankly pressure around the world that views that as a reasonable course of action. When you get into the question of how to navigate geopolitical circumstances and military situations, you have those who tend towards saying, let's solve things diplomatically, and you have those who tend to say, let's solve things through military strength. So after 2 years, there is a sizable portion of people who are saying enough of even within Israel. On the flip side, Netanyahu and a sizable group are saying, if we let Hamas win by negotiating something with them at this point, we are simply inviting another October 7th massacre. We are simply kicking the can down the road for a year or 2 or 3 for Hamas to regroup, to indoctrinate 14, 15, 16, 17-year-olds to be suicide bombers, to begin another intifada, etc. And there's a sizable group of people here who feel that. Netanyahu needs the backing of President Trump, and the American administration is facing, even within America, all of this backlash. And even ardent Israel supporters, like the evangelical community, are saying, when is enough enough? Now, we don't know the real numbers of how many have been killed in Gaza. I do not believe the numbers put out by the Gaza Health Ministry, which is run by Hamas. We don't know the real numbers, but we know that many have been killed, as if you go back to the very first post I put out after October 7th, I said thousands and thousands and thousands will die. Why? Because you're not dealing with a rational enemy who is actually looking for peace. You're dealing with, and this is the thing the West does not understand. Folks, we're not dealing with 100,000 people in Hamas. we're dealing with tens of millions, perhaps upwards of 100 to 150 million radicalized Muslims. This is not your average Muslim living around the world. And I know every time I say that, I get all the negative comments saying, all Islam is dedicated to violence and all Islam and this and that. I am not here to parse out Islamic theology. But I know this, I just came back from Indonesia. I had beautiful conversations, beautiful Muslim people, kind, peaceful, respectful. I wish on the streets of America there was the kind of kindness and manners and respect that I saw in Indonesia. And the number one concern that all of the Muslims that I talked to in Indonesia, the number one concern that they had was radical Islam. I understand the theory that some Christians have about Islamic text. I'm not here to debate that. I'm here to say, on the ground, in the real world, there are many peaceful Muslims who just want to live in peace with Jewish neighbors, with Christian neighbors, with Buddhist neighbors, with Hindu neighbors. But our planet has a large problem, and that is a radicalized version of Islam. And so now you have Bibi and a portion saying, no, we've got to completely annihilate Hamas because we're not putting up with this anymore, because we left in 2005 and look at what we've gotten in return. Now, Bibi's political future hangs in the balance in the midst of those two polar opposites. He cannot hold his government together if he goes the path of creating a non-military solution for the hostages. And I believe that Bibi genuinely feels, and I think he's got a good reason to feel this way, that that is ultimately a decision that history will not judge him well on. That the military decision is the wiser decision, even though Israel will pay a price for it. But it becomes very, very convoluted, because at the same time, the far right in Israel is saying, let's just occupy Gaza and take it over because we left, we gave them 20-some years, and we're done. And so Bibi Netanyahu is stuck in the middle of these extremes and having to walk that out every day. These are the things that we're going to be processing through together over probably the next months. I don't think it'll go into a year. And American support or pressure, one way or the other, is vital to what happens here on the ground. This is not a simple place to be. This is a complex, challenging, difficult, nuanced, multi-layered place to be. And it requires careful study, careful understanding, careful prayer. It requires a long-term vision, and that's why I hope you join us every single week for the Israel Frontline update. Keep working and praying for the peace of Jerusalem.